Okay, so we're going to get started with a quick introduction to immunity. This is probably going to be a pretty quick lecture relatively. There's not too much content on this, so I will try to elaborate as much as possible, but I didn't want to put too much on here that didn't pertain to the MCAT. So I just tried to fit on the slides what is expected of you when you take the MCAT, specifically for the biology section. So let's get started. What is immunity? The immune system is the bodily system composed of organs, tissue, and other substances that protect the body from infection and disease. So the immune system is comprised of two systems, the innate and the adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is also sometimes further divided. It really depends on what study material you use. Sometimes you'll see adaptive immunity divided into humoral immunity and cell-mediated. Don't get too stressed out over which division is used in which specific resource. Just as long as you understand specifically the components of each, like you understand what the cells are doing, you understand specifically what each job is, you don't really have to worry too much about, oh, is it adaptive? Is it humoral? Is it cell-mediated? So usually when I teach it or when I learned it, I just learned that it was split into innate and adaptive. So that's probably how I'm going to frame the lecture, just within those two subsets of the immune system. And both of the immune systems work together to provide a robust response against foreign invaders. So it's usually a combination of both. It usually starts with the innate immune system, and then the adaptive immune system takes over. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. I put this graphic over here. It's just a basic sketch of the immune system and part of the lymphatic system. Okay, so innate immunity. Innate immunity is comprised of multiple organs, proteins, and cells. The innate immune system mounts a quick, non-specific response to a wide variety of pathogens. So that is the important part about the innate immune system. It is pretty much the first line of defense for the body. So it mounts a quick response as soon as it recognizes that there's a foreign invader in the body. It's quick and it's non-specific. So that means it's not really looking for these specific peptide sequences that we'll talk about in a little bit. The adaptive immune system is really good at finding things that it's seen before and getting rid of them. The innate immune system is pretty much just on the lookout for anything that seems suspicious. So anything that comes in contact with cells of your innate immune system and structures of the innate immune system, it's just a general non-specific effort to stave off infection. So some of the structures of the innate immune system, the skin is the body's first line of defense against invasion by microorganisms. So sometimes we don't really think of the skin as an organ, or we don't really think of it as part of the immune system, but it actually is. It's a pretty important part because it separates the internal part of your body from the external. So it really is the first line of defense against, physical invaders into your body. And lysozyme is an enzyme that kills bacteria. It's found in tears, saliva, and blood. So a little bit in the blood, tears and saliva, especially just because whenever your body has openings, like openings in the skin, you want to make sure that we're protected. So that lysozyme is found in tears and saliva, and it helps kill the bacteria before they're able to actually get into those openings. And stomach acid is the same way. It may also kill pathogens before they enter the body. You have hydrochloric acid in your stomach. I believe it's pH around 2. So it's not very hospitable of an environment for any living organism. So a lot of times when we breathe in or when we eat, if there's bacteria on our food, if there are any other microorganisms on our food, the stomach acid in our stomach also plays a role in innate immunity, and it helps us kill those bacteria before we absorb them into our body. Neutrophils and macrophages are non-specific phagocytes. They engulf foreign microorganisms, so that's what a phagocyte is. You probably learned in high school and college about phagocytosis. It's just the process by which one cell will take in something else. So neutrophils and macrophages actually eat these microorganisms and they digest them from within. And that's why they are called phagocytes. And there are a couple of other phagocytes as well. And then the complement system, there's not too much on the MCAT about it, but I did think it was worth mentioning. All my study materials mentioned it. But the complement system is just a group of proteins in your blood that non-specifically bind to foreign cells and promote an immune response. That's really all you need to know about the complement system. They're just the proteins that are floating around in your blood. If they come in contact with, say, a bacterium or something like that, they're just going to stick to the bacterium and they're going to alert your immune system that there's something else in there. So it's just another system that our body uses to identify foreign invaders. And if I haven't mentioned before, just please keep your mics muted. And then at the end of each section, you'll have a chance to unmute, or you can always type in the chat box. I'll do my best to answer questions in the chat box. Janelle is going to be the standby tutor. She's going to be a little bit late, but she'll be on in a few minutes to help us out as well. So continuing with the innate immunity, I put a picture to the right. It sort of outlines the lymphatic system. You can see all of those lymph nodes, those little bumps. And those are the lymph vessels throughout the body. We're going to talk a little bit about the lymphatic system at the end of the lecture. But for now, we're just going to continue on with innate immunity. So a major response of the innate immune system to fight infection is inflammation. Okay, so during inflammation, capillaries dilate and allow white blood cells and protein to leak out of the blood into the surrounding tissue. So that innate immunity, usually the first response, if you get a cut or if you get any sort of opening in your skin or any spot on your skin where there's a potential foreign invader, you're going to see this sort of inflammation reaction happening locally. And that really is just the body's non-specific way to try to kill whatever is being invaded. So it's going to, a lot of fluid is going to leak out. It's going to puff up. It's going to try to suffocate the bacterium. It's going to increase the heat in the area to try to burn the bacterium out. So that's a natural part of your body's innate immune system. And obviously, just like other systems of your body, sometimes it goes haywire. If you know anaphylactic shock, that's an inflammatory disease. So it pretty much just goes haywire, and things that aren't supposed to be inflamed become inflamed. And then sometimes it's difficult to swallow, difficult to breathe, and it can result in death. So inflammation on a controlled level is a good thing. It helps us keep foreign invaders out, and it helps us kill them before an infection happens. But like others, if it's going haywire, then it's definitely dangerous. So like I said, the capillaries dilate, and it allows these white blood cells and proteins to leak out of the blood into the surrounding tissue. So we talked a little bit about this during the digestive system. We talked about it when we were talking about the renal system. It's just this theme in biology that whenever proteins or solutes leave a solution, the water is going to follow. So when we're talking about the renal system, if we're in the collecting duct, if we let sodium ions in, the water is going to follow. It's just how osmosis works. It's the same exact thing with inflammation. Capillaries are leaky by nature. They're usually pretty tight. And then when this inflammation occurs, there are a couple of proteins and a couple of different substances. We just generally refer to them as cytokines. And that's we're going to talk about it in a couple of minutes, but those are what the cells release, and that causes the inflammation. So the capillaries actually sort of break apart, and there are holes in the middle of them, and they're large enough for these white blood cells. Really, the primary reason why they break apart is to let these white blood cells out of the blood and into the surrounding tissue. But white blood cells are so big that if we let them through, we also have to let these proteins through. So the proteins are going to also follow the white blood cells into the tissue, and just by osmosis, the water is also going to follow out of the capillaries into the tissue. And that's what causes inflammation. That's what causes this local swelling. And the swelling of tissue is known as edema. Fluids, proteins, and white blood cells in the surrounding tissue can be picked up and returned to circulation via the lymphatic system. So edema, our body usually handles edema by draining it via the lymphatic system. Sometimes when there is a malfunction of the lymphatic system, their edema can be pretty dangerous. I mean, I'm sure you've seen pictures of, people with feet that are just completely swollen from edema, and that's just because there's a dysfunction in the lymphatic system and it's not doing its job properly. Okay, so we talked a little bit about innate immunity, and now we're just going to go to the second part, which is adaptive immunity. So to the left, I put the structure of an antibody, which we're going to talk about. The adaptive immune system is the portion of the immune system that provides specific and long-lasting protection against foreign microorganisms. So the adaptive and innate immune system work together. It's sort of like two arms on the same person. One of them is a super quick response, so it gets to the infection as soon as possible, and it just starts doing what it's supposed to do. And then the adaptive immunity plays the long game. It analyzes, it remembers, and it prepares for next time. So a major component of the adaptive immune system is the production and release of antibodies. And antibodies are also known as immunoglobulins. Each antibody has 2 light chains and 2 heavy chains. I think it's pretty important to know the structure of these antibodies. I do see them decently often on a bunch of review questions for the MCAT. So the heavy chains are obviously the longer ones, and the light chains are the outside ones on the 2. And this is just the general structure of each antibody. There are 5 classes that we'll go over, but most antibodies are like this. They all have 2 light chains, they all have 2 heavy chains, and on each of the chains, they have 2 separate regions. So if you look right in the middle, there's the variable region and the constant region. The variable region is also called the antigen binding site, and that's what varies specifically to recognize different antigens that come into the body. So this whole thing looks like a Y. These 2 tips of the Y are basically where the antibody is attaching to the antigen that it finds. This constant region remains constant for a specific antibody, but it changes depending on class. So there are 5 different classes. There, you would expect there to be 5 different types of constant regions. So there are only 5 constant regions, but the variable region will change for every single antibody that's out there because they have to attach to different antigens. So the chains are further divided, and we classify the antibodies into the 5 classes based on the sequence and structure of their constant region. So these are the 5 antibodies, the 5 classes of antibodies, and most blood antibodies are part of the IgG class. So IgG is actually the most common type of antibody. In your blood, it makes up about 80% of the antibodies that are in your blood plasma. And we could just take a look at these really quickly. So this first one over here, this sort of pentameric antibody is the IgM version. And the heavy chain, the letters at the end of them are just based on the heavy chain. So this is the IgM, it has a mu chain. This is the IgG, it has a gamma chain. That's not too important. The most important thing is just to understand that antibodies are separated into 5, and it would probably be worth your while to at least recognize that IgG is the main one that we deal with. But I would definitely try to commit these functions to memory as well. So IgM, the primary response fixes component, monomer serves as a B cell receptor. They are mostly B cell receptors, IgM antibodies. IgG antibodies are the ones that we're probably going to be talking about for the entire time. They're sort of like the prototypical antibody. They neutralize toxins, opsonization. IgA, those are antibodies that are secreted into mucus, tears, and saliva. So kind of before how we were talking about how lysozyme is in your tears and your saliva, it's the same thing. You have antibodies in there as well, because again, we're trying to cover our ground. Anytime we have an opening in our skin, we want to have as much protection as we can because it's an opening into our body. The IgE immunoglobulin is an antibody of allergy and antiparasitic activity. It's not super common, but it is implicated in allergy and antiparasitic activity. And then IgD is almost completely B cell receptors. So you'll find these IgD receptors, these immunoglobulins on the B cells, just to identify different pathogens. So the variable region of each antibody is different and constructed to fit a specific pathogen. Antibodies are produced by B cells. B cells are one of the a type of cell that is part of the adaptive immune system. When an antigen binds to an immunoglobulin on an immature B cell, the cell differentiates into memory cells, which monitor the blood for future encounters with the same pathogen, and plasma cells, which are directly responsible for producing and secreting antibodies into the plasma. So immature B cell just means a B cell that's floating around your body that has not come in contact with its antigen, because every single B cell that your body creates from your bone marrow has a specific antigen that it will lock into. Some B cells will float around your body for a couple of years and will never come into contact with their specific antigen, and they'll just be broken down. But once a B cell comes into contact with its antigen for the first time, it's going to start dividing and it's going to split into 2 different distinct B cells. The first one, like we said, is a memory cell, and those are basically, it's basically just surveillance for your body. They're floating around your blood and they're making sure that we don't come into contact with that antigen again. If we do come into contact with the antigen again, then it attaches to it and it starts multiplying and it creates more plasma cells. Plasma cells are the ones that are directly responsible for producing and secreting antibodies into the plasma. So those are the ones that are actually releasing the immunoglobulins and the ones that are actually responsible for the immune response by the B cells. So those divide asymmetrically, they make two. And that's how we keep our immunity, basically, these memory cells. That's the theory behind vaccination. That's just how your adaptive immune system works. If we expose ourselves to an antigen, those memory cells are going to be floating around in our blood. So the next time they stick to an antigen that comes into our body, the immune response is super quick. The second time an adaptive response is triggered, it's extremely quick. The first time, it could take days to weeks to mount full immunity from the adaptive immune system, but is quick the second time. Okay, so it looks like 100% of you said C, which is cool because that's the answer. Great job. So which of the following are part of the innate immune system? Pretty black and white. The IgG immunoglobulins they come from B cells, which are adaptive immunity. They're cells from the adaptive immune system. So one is incorrect. And from there, you can pretty much just cross out A, B, and D. Skin is also part of the innate immune system. We said it's the first barrier to protect against invading microorganisms. Macrophages also, those are the phagocytic cells of the innate immune system. They'll take in any sort of foreign invader, digest it. And stomach acid as well is part of the innate immune system. Excuse me, I just wanted to put these on here, like the skin and stomach acid one, just so that you really understand that the immune system is not just a bunch of microscopic cells. It's these larger structures, and they all contribute to immunity, specifically innate immunity.